So we're going to be looking at something a lot different this morning. I normally do this about every year at this time, and that's we're going to be looking at scientific, logical, historical proofs of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. It is interesting to note that the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, and the passage that Ted read this morning, actually gives how to destroy Christianity. And that is that Christianity is based upon the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And the Apostle Paul is very clear that if Jesus did not rise from the dead, then the entire Christian faith is worthless. In fact, he goes on to say that Christian people would be, of all people, the most miserable. Now, in our context here in the United States, we do not see this as much as the context in which it was written. In the first century, to be a Christian was to be ostracized from the community, was to lose your position, people no longer do business with you, be disowned by your family, kicked out of your home, and more than likely be arrested and executed for believing in Jesus. Why on earth would anyone in their right mind do that? Well, the only explanation is that Jesus rose again from the dead. So when people argue in our society against Christianity, they will argue from the standpoint of evolution. They will argue from the standpoint of morality. There's arguments about slavery, and there's arguments about human sexuality and all those type of things. And they'll talk about being on the right side of history, and they'll bring up the Crusades and all those type of things. Christianity is based upon the resurrection, not as a theory, but as a historical fact. So what I want to do this morning is go over the facts concerning the resurrection. And we'll do this for two main reasons. One, if you are not a Christian, this shows that Christianity is not based upon a myth, but is based upon reality. A reality that you have to deal with and you have to face and you have to confront. Secondly, as a Christian, in our society that is becoming more and more anti-Christian, the skepticism and the attacks can begin to get to you, and you can begin to question aspects of your faith, and this is meant to strengthen your faith in Jesus Christ. So as we look at the resurrection, there's several things we need to note as we kind of lay the groundwork. First, in defining what is true and what is false, there are many things in this world that are hard to prove true, and there are also things in this world that are hard to prove false. As it relates to religious beliefs, Christianity is the only one that is falsifiable. In other words, that you could definitively prove to not be true. And that's important, because when you talk about, say, Mormonism is Joseph Smith having a private vision from an angel that helped interpret gold plates that then were raptured and are gone. How do you prove that the gold plates didn't exist? How do you prove that he didn't have the vision when he was all by himself? Well, you can't really disprove it. Islam is based upon the Prophet Muhammad being out in the desert, having a vision from an angel that then resulted in the Quran. How do you prove that someone did not have a vision when they were by themselves? You could do the same thing as it relates to Buddhism and enlightenment. How do you prove that someone wasn't enlightened? How do you prove all of those things? Well, Christianity is the only religion that is based upon a public visual fact, and that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. It is in a place that is very clearly defined, not only Jerusalem, but also where in Jerusalem he was crucified. Okay? And by the way, you can go to where Jesus was crucified today. There are things in the Quran that are hard to justify geographically. There are things in the Book of Mormon that describe places that don't fit any description of any place on earth. The same thing is true of many other religions. Christianity, you can go to the nation of Israel, you can go to Jerusalem, you can go to Golgotha, you can go to where Jesus was crucified. You can also go to the tomb that Jesus was buried in. To disprove Christianity, all you have to do is produce Jesus' body. That's it. All you have to do is prove that the nation of Israel didn't exist, the Jewish people didn't exist, the Romans didn't exist, the city of Jerusalem didn't exist, Golgotha didn't exist, crucifixion didn't exist. But there's more details about Jesus' crucifixion. Okay? Pontius Pilate, Herod, who was the high priest. All of those details are found in Scripture, and those can be independently verified by people who are not Christians. If you study Roman history, you can find that Pilate and Herod would have been ruling exactly the way Scripture says at the exact same time Jesus was crucified. You can go and you can track back to the day Jesus was crucified. Then you can see that Pilate and Herod and Caiaphas, all of those people were players there. Okay? Again, going to the tomb. All of these things could easily be disproved if they were made up. But you can, 2,000 years later, go and confirm for yourself that Jesus' tomb is empty. So when we talk about history, you have to look back on the people who were present and their records of what they kept. And so when it comes to Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, there are three groups of people historically that were present. Okay? There were the Jews, and there were the Jews, and who's divided in two parts, which gives us two groups. The Jews who rejected Jesus, and the Jews who believed in Jesus. By the way, at the time of Jesus' resurrection, there was only one group of Jews, because the disciples didn't believe in the resurrection either. It was only after the resurrection that they became Christians. Up until that point in time, that when Jesus died, they thought that was the end of the Christian faith. Okay? So then you also have a third group, which is the Romans. Historically, Jews, Christians, and Romans did not get along very well. Okay? Specifically, the Jews and the Romans did not like each other. The Jews tried to rise up against the Romans, and the Romans suppressed the Jews, specifically AD 70, when they slaughtered them en masse. So if the Jews and the Romans agree on something in their histories, it is probably because it is true. Okay? Christians were hated by both the Jews and the Romans, and was kind of the only way the Jews and the Romans kind of made peace was to persecute the Christians. So when you begin to look at history, specifically the history of the resurrection, there are three groups of people, the Jews, the Christians, and the Romans, who were physically present. There are people today who will begin to look back at this time, and they will come from an American mindset, and quite honestly, an arrogant mindset, that we knew more of what was taking place than the people who were actually present. Okay? That's not history. History is that which is recorded by the people that were present, and you can go back and you can look through at archaeology, etc. So when you look at the Jews, the Romans, and the Christians, there is a significant level of agreement between them. You can read Josephus, who was a Jewish historian. You can read the rabbis of that time frame. You can read some of the Roman history. And this is what you will find, is they all agree there was a man named Jesus. They all agree that this man named Jesus was reported to have done miracles. Now, obviously, the Jews and the Romans would disagree from the Christians as to whether there were actual miracles or not. Okay? They believe that this man who was reported to have done miracles was crucified under Pontius Pilate. The Jews, the Romans, the Christians all agree to this. They also all agree that Jesus died during that crucifixion. Okay, which is important. We'll get to some theories concerning the resurrection later. But the Jews and the Romans believed that Jesus died during that crucifixion. Okay? They also all agree on the place Jesus was buried. The Jews were concerned that the disciples would steal Jesus' body and say he rose again from the dead. So the Jews went to where Jesus was buried. They identified the tomb, they took Roman soldiers, and they put a Roman seal on Jesus' tomb. Okay, so the Jews, the Christians, and the Romans all agree that this man Jesus who was reported to have done miracles, was crucified under Pilate, was buried in a particular tomb that all three groups identified. Next, and this is important, all three groups agree that the third day the tomb was empty. The Jews believed the tomb was empty. The Romans believed the tomb was empty. The Christians believed the tomb was empty. Okay? Now we're going to go forward from there in a little bit. But this historical fact deals with some of the explanations for the resurrection. So there is some explanations. For example, one of the ones from Islam is that there was a hallucination or a look-alike, and the person who was crucified was not actually Jesus Christ. That Jesus was taken to heaven because he was a prophet, and it wasn't actually Jesus that died. The problem with that is there were no Muslims present when Jesus was crucified. In fact, there was no Islam. Okay? All the people who were present all agreed that that was Jesus, including Jesus' cousin, Jesus' brother, and Jesus' mother. Okay? You don't think that a mother would recognize her own child. And so when this idea that it wasn't Jesus that was crucified, well, historically you have to reject that, because everyone present at that time would say that it was Jesus who was crucified. Another explanation is the wrong tomb, and that is that Jesus was either thrown in a ditch or Jesus was buried, and in the confusion, they forgot the tomb. And so they went and they found a new tomb where nobody had ever been buried, and they went, oh, Jesus has risen from the dead. There's some problems with this. One, the Jews and the Romans sealed the tomb and put guards in front of it. Okay? Two, if it was the wrong tomb, you could have stopped a lot of bloodshed and a lot of conflict in the first 300 years of the Roman of the AD, BCE, however you want to call it, the Common Era, through just throwing a dead body in the streets. If they produced a dead Jesus, Christianity would not have existed. Okay, all they had to do was show the right tomb. But if you remember, if you went into the tomb, the clothes that Jesus was wrapped in were laying in the tomb. Okay, so they went to the right tomb. And let me just also say how offensive it is to say that they went to the wrong tomb. Some of you in here have lost children. You know where your child's buried. It is ingrained in your memory, and you will never forget it. To say that a mother would be so distraught she would forget where her child was buried is crazy. Okay? Again, not the wrong tomb. So we can eliminate that it wasn't Jesus. We can eliminate that it was the wrong tomb. One of the other theories is that Jesus didn't actually die. Okay? And the theory is that they did not have modern medicine. So Jesus just passed out from blood loss. Then when they wrapped him in the burial clothes, that was kind of like bandaging the wounds. And then when they put spices in the tomb, which was the way they buried, that acted like smelling salts. Jesus woke up, rolled the stone away, and walked off and said, hey, here I am. They're like, oh, he's alive. Okay? There are several problems with that theory. One, the Romans were some of the most efficient killing machines in the history of mankind. They had perfected the art of killing people. And not just an art of killing people, of torturing people. The modern scholars have gone back and looked at the beating that Jesus received. It is probable that you could see Jesus' internal organs through his back because of the whipping that he would have received. The blood loss that Jesus sustained was so great that he was unable to carry his cross the short distance to where he was crucified, and they had to get someone else. Okay? If you study and understand anything about medicine, you cannot produce blood unless you are getting fluids in. This is why Jesus was thirsty, because as the body loses blood and wants to replace blood, you become very, very thirsty. How on earth is Jesus, after all of this blood loss, going to revive without any IVs, without anything to drink? He is just going to magically produce blood. That's scientifically impossible. Okay, it doesn't work that way. Also, Jesus would have probably died from the beating if he had not been crucified. Okay, the severity of the beating that Jesus received, he would have bled out completely within 24 hours, maybe 48. But to say that he survived 3 days after that beating is just medically impossible. In addition to that, he had a spear go through his heart. We have some amazing doctors in this world, but if you put someone on an operating table with the best surgeons in the world and rammed a spear through their heart, I doubt they could save them with all of our modern medicine. Okay? Jesus had a spear go through his heart. The Romans confirmed that he was dead. The Jews confirmed that he was dead. Even if he did pass out from blood loss, and even if they bandaged him, and all of those medical impossibilities were possible, how on earth was he supposed to roll the stone away? You remember there was 5 women in Luke 24 that were going to visit the tomb, and those 5 third world strong women were concerned that they would be unable to move the stone. Now, American women are strong women, but they are not third world strong. Okay? Some of you who are older may have ground your own wheat. Some of you who are older may have strangled chickens and plucked them. But most American women have not experienced what it is to carry 5 gallons of water uphill for an hour just to have water for your family. Most of you have not had to wash clothes by hand, have not had to do all the butchering and all the other things that you had to do, churn your own butter and all the other things that women had to do. These women would have been far stronger than your average first century or your average 21st century American woman. And 5 of them did not believe they had the strength to roll the stone away. How did Jesus roll the stone away from inside the tomb where there was no leverage and there was no handhold? It is just physically impossible. Even if he did revive from all the spices, he was wrapped hand and foot. And you remember Lazarus was buried in the same way, and Lazarus had to shuffle out of the tomb, and someone else had to release him from the burial clothes because he would have been wrapped. You know, how many of y'all played the mummy game with toilet paper where you just wrap it all the way around? Think of how hard it is to do that when you're wrapped with toilet paper. Now make it be strips of cloth. There is absolutely no way that that is a possibility. Okay, so we know it's Jesus. We know he's actually dead. We know he didn't revive in the tomb. We know it's the right tomb. Okay, so what then happened? Okay, well, this is where the Jews, the Romans, and the Christians go separate directions. They've agreed all the way up until this point. If you study the history and you read the writings, they've all agreed up to this point. And here is where there's a divergence. The Christians say Jesus rose again from the dead. The Jews say the disciples stole Jesus' body, and the Romans went along with that. Okay? Several historical things to note that are a problem with this theory. One, for a Roman soldier to fail at his duty, he would be executed. Horribly executed. If you remember when Paul was in prison and there was the earthquake, you remember that the doors of the prison had fallen down because of the earthquake. What was the jailer going to do? He's going to commit suicide. Why? Because suicide was nicer than what was going to happen to him if someone escaped. Okay? Think of the horror and how much you would have to dread the next day if you would think about taking your life instantly. Married with kids, he's going to take his life because if one of the prisoners escapes, he is going to be horribly tortured and executed. Yet, we have recorded that not a single one of the guards on Jesus' tomb was executed. Why? Did the Romans suspend their rule of law? Or does it have what we have recorded, and that is that their commanding officer was bribed to cover up the resurrection? Again, you have the historical fact. The historical fact that the soldiers were not executed. Let's do another historical fact. The Christians didn't believe that Jesus was going to rise again from the dead. They didn't. In fact, when Thomas was told by the rest of them, "We saw Jesus," what did Thomas say? "I refuse to believe it." Peter had already given up on Jesus and gone back to fishing. They did not believe that Jesus was going to rise again from the dead. They did not believe that at all. Okay? They were also terrified. They locked themselves in hiding because they were scared that what happened to Jesus was going to happen to them. They were scared. You remember in the garden, Peter jumps out, and then we talk about Peter and his bravery. Here is soldiers who are armed coming. Peter has a sword. He jumps out, and who does he attack? A servant boy. He doesn't attack the soldiers. He attacks the unarmed boy that's with them. And all the rest of them still run off. And this is the guy that's going to go and steal Jesus' body? It doesn't match. I mean, they did not believe in the resurrection. They did not they had already moved on with their lives. They were terrified of being arrested. They were terrified of the Romans. They all ran when Jesus was going to be crucified. Like, if you wanted to create a hoax or you wanted to have your own religion, you should have fought for Jesus while he was alive, not try to create one afterwards. Okay? Now, so the idea of the disciples stealing the body is just not logically factual or historically factual. Okay? Now you have another problem, and that is over 500 people claim to have seen Jesus after his resurrection. So let's think about historical claims. Do people lie? Yes. Why do people lie? Well, they have to have some sort of motivation. Okay? People will lie to avoid punishment. Okay? I mean, everyone in here, I'm sure, as a child has lied to their mother so they wouldn't get a spanking. Maybe I'm the only one, but I don't think so. Okay? We've all lied to, police officers so that we wouldn't get a ticket, or we've all lied to get out of punishment. These people were dipped in tar and burned alive to provide lighting for dinner parties, and all they had to say was it's a hoax, and they would not have died, yet they refused to take it back. These people were eaten by animals, crucified upside down, literally sawed in half, beheaded, tortured, and yet not a single one of the eyewitnesses to Jesus' resurrection ever took their story back. If you had 500 people that were a witness to anything, okay, I imagine we could find 500 people that watched the Super Bowl. I can pretty much guarantee you that 500 out of the 500 would lie about the results of the Super Bowl if you were going to dip them in tar and light them on fire. But to find 500 eyewitnesses that you could imprison, torture, and kill, and not a single one of them recant, is a miracle in and of itself. That they would not retract it. Okay, so people will lie to avoid punishment. Well, these people were punished for telling the truth that Jesus rose again from the dead. What's another reason people will lie? Power. People will lie for power. That's called politics, okay? People will lie for power. And all of the disciples, this was their religion. The most powerful person in the room is the greatest slave who serves everyone. So in Haiti, most of y'all have been very blessed to live in the States, but in Haiti they have these wonderful things called outhouses that are absolutely repulsive and disgusting. Okay, just imagine a porta potty without American sanitation in 100-degree weather. Okay, it's glorious, and there are people who clean those porta potties. Okay, I can't tell you the Creole term for it. Anthony can. But nobody wants that job. And if they have that job, they clean them at night. And it's the worst thing you can call a Haitian is a outhouse cleaner. Like, that's the worst thing ever. They're embarrassed and they're ashamed. In the first century, the worst possible job was washing other people's feet. Okay, that was the equivalent of being a Haitian outhouse cleaner. And yet, That is what the apostles got. That is who is the greatest in Christianity. We are so used to seeing the distortions of Christianity, that is the Pope and everybody trying to kiss his ring and kiss his finger and kiss his feet and here, kiss my baby and all the wealth and the gold and the outfits. That was not first century Christianity. First century Christianity was, you're an apostle, that means you go wash everybody else's feet and you serve everyone else. They got no power. Okay? Well, what about sex? People will lie for sex, guys especially. Okay? And yet, what do they teach? Singleness is the preferred state. 1 Corinthians 7. Adultery is wrong. Fornication is wrong. Even lusting after other people is wrong. And they taught a very restrictive purity. They didn't get sex out of the lie. Money. People will lie for money. That happens all the time in business. This is why people get a reputation as, being, a salesman or whatever, because it's about their lying for money. The disciples gave everything away. In fact, you can read that they would sell extra possessions that they had so they could give to poor people. They died broke because they gave everything away. So they didn't lie to escape punishment. They didn't lie for money. They didn't lie for sex. They didn't lie for position. Fame. People will lie to be popular. Okay, this is a new phenomenon in our society with influencers and Instagram and all that. Apparently every teenager now wants to be famous. That's the goal, is to be famous. Why? I don't know. But people want to be famous. They want people to know their names. Okay, the disciples were infamous. The only reason that we name our kids after them is because we're Christians. For their entire lifetime, they were despised and hated by everyone. There was no fame. So, if they lied, what motivation? What did they get out of the lie? Well, the answer is nothing. Okay? Well, then, let's just say, well, there's some motivation that we didn't know about and they still lied anyway. Okay? Have you ever met two people who can tell a lie and can keep the story going? Separately, this happens all the time in our judicial system, the good cop, bad cop, and you have two people that are lying and, well, so-and-so is going to turn on, if you don't turn on them first. Can you imagine three people? Okay, think of you and your siblings trying to lie to your parents about a dish that you broke. And what happened? Eventually, one of your siblings snitched, didn't they? Okay, and maybe it was you, but you didn't tell them it was you, okay? And we got siblings looking at each other down here, okay? Because we know. Now, if you were to take, Watergate's a good example of this in American politics. You look at Watergate, and there was like three people, and yet every single person, they couldn't keep their story straight and they ended up ratting on each other. You're going to tell me 500 people had the exact same story and kept the exact same story, and not a single person of those people ever changed the story till they died. That in of itself, again, is another miracle. Okay? Well, there is a possible solution that people have come up with, and that is they all hallucinated. And I'm not kidding. There are actually scholars who believe this, that they got into some mushrooms, or maybe got into a new batch of some alcohol, and they all hallucinated. Maybe they got into ayahuasca or whatever, and they all went on a little trip together. Okay, there's several problems with that. One, psychologists will tell you that if you hallucinate, it is based upon experiences that are already in your mind. Your mind does not create new things. Okay? It will go, it's kind of like dreams or whatever. It will replay and piece together things from your memory. The disciples did not believe in Jesus' resurrection. So there was no memory that they could then create through a hallucination. Also, and I hope this is not a lot of people here, but if you've ever been on drugs or known people who are on drugs, most people, when they go on psychedelic trips, it is not a pleasant experience. Okay, I worked with several people who did acid, and they had some very interesting stories. One of them, the popcorn on the ceiling turned to lava and started falling on him. Okay, another one was playing basketball, and the middle of the basketball court became a black hole, and he was running around and tackling people, saying, "Don't fall in the hole, man, don't fall in the hole." Another one, the light bulbs came down out of the ceiling, became monsters, and chased him down the hallway, so he had to run to the room, turn all the lights off so that the light bulbs wouldn't eat him. That's what a drug trip looks like. It doesn't look like a conversation with your brother who died a few days ago. It doesn't look like that at all. Also, if you have a lot of people who are on some type of psychedelic, they all have different experiences. They don't have the same experience. Okay? And to have 500 people come out of a meeting and all have the same story is not explainable by psychedelics, mushrooms, alcohol, or any drug known to man. That is not a hallucination. That is a reality. By the way, if you were to go through recorded human history and say that you have to have more than 500 eyewitnesses for something to be true, you'd have to eliminate the vast majority of your history book. Okay? Things like the Continental Congress, we would have to say is questionable whether it took place. The Declaration of Independence, we'd have to question whether it was a forged document because it has less than 500 signatures on it. Okay? A substantial amount of U.S. history we would have to question. A substantial amount of world history we'd have to question. So you have Jesus physically died, was buried in a tomb, 3 days later is no longer in the tomb, and you have 500 eyewitnesses that say he rose again from the dead. The only alternative explanation is they stole his body, but then again, the soldiers that were guarding the tomb aren't executed. It would look that the historical evidence points to Jesus rose again from the dead. Now you say, but that just is a scientific impossibility. Okay, let me give you some other explanations of things that are scientifically impossible. How does a religion that teaches celibacy, washing other people's feet, and giving away your possessions to the poor overtake the Roman Empire based on a lie? How does that religion even exist today in our decadent American society? How did Christianity ever get anybody to follow it? I mean, let's just be honest. How many of y'all would sign up for a religion like that? Like, there's no reason for it. So how did that religion explode? And how did it explode in the face of persecution? There's only one explanation for Christianity outliving the Roman Empire. There's only one explanation for Christianity existing today, and that it's based upon fact. That there was a supernatural power that raised Jesus from the dead, and that supernatural power is what created the church, created Christianity, and sustains it to this day. The Bible is the most banned book in the history of the world. Yet it is the most widely read, translated, and printed book in the history of the world. Those two things do not coincide unless there is a supernatural explanation. Okay? That there's only one explanation for its existence, and that is divine. It defies all human reason. But there is another explanation, and this is the one I really want to focus on, for how we can know that Jesus rose again from the dead. And that is the short little message we looked at outside. Christ died for our sins, was buried, and rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. To this day, radically changes people's lives. I have seen that message make an alcoholic sober without any counseling or AA meetings. I have seen that simple message, Christ died for our sins, was buried, and rose again from the third day, deliver people from some of the most addictive drugs. All they did was believe that message. No rehab, no checking themselves into a facility, and they were set free from that addiction. I have seen people who were horrible fathers hear that message and go home and apologize to their kids and live differently. And all they did was hear that message. I have seen so many people's lives changed simply from that message. No peer pressure, no psychological conditioning, no trying to force people. That message has radically changed almost all the lives in this room. How many of you can speak of how different your life is and what happened? There's only one thing that you can point to, and that is the power that raised Jesus from the dead changed you. There's no other explanation. There is no other explanation. For those here who may be skeptics, I will challenge you and I will make you a promise right here. If you can prove that Jesus did not rise again from the dead, I will burn my Bible and I will leave Christianity and never be a pastor again. I've offered that challenge, and I'm still a pastor and I still have my Bible, because no one has ever been able to disprove it. In fact, there was an investigative journalist named Lee Strobel whose wife became a Christian, and he was so mad at her becoming a Christian that he determined that he was going to disprove Christianity. And so he went and investigated the resurrection and converted to Christianity and wrote a book called The Case for Christ, because as he investigated it, he realized it was true. The issue with Christianity and the resurrection is not that it's some far-fetched myth that is not worth investigating. No, it's if you investigate it, you will become a Christian, because it is true. And I would challenge you, anyone that wants to argue, I'm not going to argue about gender, I'm not going to argue about the creation, I will just ask you to look into the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's it. And if you can prove to me that Jesus did not rise again from the dead, I will reject this message. But you can't. It should be the easiest thing to disprove. And people have tried for 2,000 years and still can't. So if you are not a Christian, I would challenge you. Look into the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And if you're a Christian, guys, our faith is under a constant attack. There is no doubt about that. Our faith is under constant attack. And sometimes you will hear some very well-spoken people. I was listening to Christopher Hitchens this past week, a dead atheist, and he had some pretty strong arguments against Christianity. And it kind of threw me for a little bit, and then I went, but Jesus rose again from the dead. Christopher Hitchens didn't. I mean, that's it. Like, that's the end of the argument. So I would encourage you, as you look at what's happening in our world and you feel more and more out of place and you feel more and more like, man, why do I believe this stuff? Some of you teenagers, you're going to go through a time when you get into your 18, 19, 20, 21, and you're going to kind of go through like making your faith your own. And what do I really believe? Is this really this, hokey religion my parents believe? Is that really what I want to base my life on? Just look at the resurrection. Just look at the resurrection. Jesus Christ rose again from the dead. That is all you need to know. Because if he rose again from the dead, then everything he said is true. You can believe every single thing he says about human nature, everything he says about human sexuality, everything about the nature of the universe, about creation. You can believe everything he's ever said if he rose again from the dead. This should strengthen your faith. This should boost your faith. As a Christian, you should leave here with a renewed faith, a renewed assurance that no matter how much people attack, Jesus Christ has still risen from the dead, the tomb is still empty, and he is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Would you go tell others about Jesus Christ and what he's done? Amen.